Imagine if I told you that there is a Native American tribe that for hundreds of years has been drawing beings with helmets, spacesuits, and symbols that look like spaceships, and that these same beings taught them advanced agricultural techniques, precise astronomical knowledge, and rituals that are still practiced today exactly as they were taught. What if I told you that these visitors promised to return, and to this day, every year, they still wait for that return? Hi, I'm Kaya, and you're here with me to discover stories that challenge everything we think we know about the world. Today we're going to delve into one of North America's most intriguing and mysterious legends, a story that questions the boundaries between what's real and what's myth, between what's earthly and what comes from much further away. To understand what happened to the Hopi people, we must first experience what life was like before that day that changed everything. Imagine a place where the horizon stretches endlessly, where red stone mesas rise like natural cathedrals against a sky so blue it hurts the eyes. The Arizona desert was and still is a place of brutal beauty, where every drop of water is a treasure and every green shoot that emerges from the arid land is celebrated as a miracle. It was the late 15th century, long before Europeans set foot on this continent. The Hopi people had chosen this inhospitable place as their home generations ago, not by chance, but out of a deep belief that there, among those sacred rocks, they would be closer to the Great Spirit. Their villages were small oases of human life lost in the vastness, like points of flickering light in the darkness of night. The houses were built of adobe, a clay mixed with straw, which absorbed the sun's scorching heat during the day and radiated it back at night, keeping families warm when the temperature dropped. The thick walls held not only thermal comfort, but also the voices, laughter, tears, and prayers of entire generations. Each house carried in its mud bricks the story of its builders, of those born within it, of those who died in its arms. The day always began before sunrise. The men awoke while the stars still shone in the sky, not out of laziness or carelessness, but because they knew that the early morning hours were the only time they could work the land without the relentless desert sun beating them down. They walked in silence to the cornfields, carrying rudimentary tools made of stone and wood, instruments their grandfathers had used, and that their grandchildren would likely use as well. Corn. Oh, corn was more than food for the Hopi people. It was sacred. Each grain planted was accompanied by a prayer. Each sprout that emerged from the earth was greeted like a newborn child. But planting corn in the desert was an act of pure faith, a constant bet against the forces of nature. The earth was hard, parched, and needed to be broken hard before it would accept the seed. And then came the agonizing wait. Would the rain come in time? Would the sun be merciful? Would the insects destroy everything? Hopi women awoke shortly after the men, but their day began indoors. They lit the fire with dry twigs, a process that could take long minutes of patience and careful blowing until the first flames danced timidly. The smell of smoke mingled with the aroma of the cornbread they prepared every morning, a recipe passed down from mother to daughter for so many generations that no one remembered who invented it. While the bread baked in clay ovens built outside their homes, they wove. Their hands, calloused from constant work, moved with hypnotic precision over the rustic looms, creating patterns that told stories. Each design on the fabric was a symbol, each color an emotion, each line a memory. They created not just blankets or clothing, but visual narratives of the life, the struggle, and the hope of their people. Hopi children grew up free, but not carefree. From a young age, they learned that life in the desert did not forgive carelessness. They played, yes, they ran among the adobe houses, laughed loudly, invented games with stones and twigs, but they also observed. They watched the adults at work, they watched the sky for clouds, They watched the wild animals that sometimes approached the village in search of water. It was an observation that went beyond childish curiosity. It was a silent learning experience, an education for life. They learned to read nature's signs. When the wind changed direction, it could indicate a storm. When birds flew lower, rain was coming. When coyotes howled differently, danger lurked. Every sound, every movement, every change in the environment was a lesson that could save lives in the future. But something was disturbing this ancient routine. A strange silence had settled over the land. Not the normal silence of the desert, that natural stillness that was part of the landscape. It was a different kind of silence, as if nature itself were holding its breath, waiting for something. The elders were the first to notice. Men and women whose faces were maps of wrinkles, each line a road traveled, each mark a storm weathered. They noticed that the animals were behaving strangely. Coyotes, normally nocturnal, appeared during the day, restless, sniffing the air as if they had caught a scent they couldn't identify. Birds changed their migratory routes, flying in confused circles before taking off in completely unexpected directions. And the plants knew something was different too. Corn grew, yes, but it seemed to be struggling more than usual. Leaves sprouted with an urgency the Hopi had never seen, as if each plant knew it needed to grow fast, that some fundamental change was coming. During the evenings, when work ceased and families gathered around campfires, conversations always returned to the same topic: signs. Everyone had noticed them, but no one could explain them. Shamans consulted the spirits through ancient rituals, burning sacred herbs, and interpreting the flights of birds, but no answers came. Or rather, the answers were confusing, contradictory, as if the spirits themselves were as lost as the humans. It was as if the world was preparing for something great, but without knowing exactly what. Old Ahote was the first to see the lights. Ahote meant restless in the Hopi language, and never had a name been more appropriate. At 72, he had spent more sleepless nights observing the sky than anyone else in the village. Not from insomnia or worry, but from a curiosity that had consumed him since childhood. The stars, to Ahote, were not just points of light lost in the vastness. They were ancient, wise, and he was certain they contained messages for those who knew how to read them. On that particular night, when the moon was just a thin blade cutting through the black sky, Ahote sat in his usual position, atop the highest table in the village, his legs crossed and his eyes fixed on infinity. He knew every constellation, every seasonal movement of the stars, every subtle change that indicated the passage of time. So when he saw something that shouldn't have been there, his heart nearly stopped. They were 3 points of light, arranged in a perfect triangle, moving slowly from north to south. They weren't stars. Stars don't move that way. They weren't nocturnal birds. Birds don't shine with their own light. And they definitely weren't natural phenomena that Ahote was familiar with, and he had seen them all throughout his 7 decades of life. At first, he thought his tired eyes were playing tricks on him. He rubbed his eyelids with the back of his hands, blinked several times, and even closed his eyes for long seconds before opening them again. But the lights remained, maintaining their triangular formation, gradually descending toward the horizon where the sacred mountains cut through the sky. Ahote climbed down from the table with an agility that surprised even him. His knees, normally aching from arthritis, seemed rejuvenated by the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He needed to tell someone. He needed witnesses. Not that he doubted what he had seen, but he knew a discovery of this magnitude couldn't be carried alone. Running from house to house, he woke first the other elders, then the shamans, then anyone willing to listen. Within minutes, half the village was gathered at the mesa, all eyes glued to the night sky. And there they were, the 3 lights, now visibly larger, closer, more defined. They weren't simply bright points. As they approached, Shapes and structures could be discerned. They appeared to be solid objects enveloped by a luminous aura that pulsed gently, like a heart beating in time with the universe. The children were the first to react. Unburdened by expectations or the fear of the unknown that haunted the adults, they simply marveled. They pointed to the sky, laughed with excitement, and asked questions no one knew the answers to. "Where do they come from?" asked a 6-year-old girl. "Are they friends?" asked a 5-year-old boy. The adults, on the other hand, remained in tense silence. Some murmured prayers under their breath. Others clutched protective amulets. Most simply watched with a mixture of fascination and terror. It was the kind of fear that arises not from an immediate threat, but from the realization that everything you thought you knew about the world was about to be challenged. As the hours passed and the lights continued their slow, deliberate descent, patterns began to emerge. They didn't move erratically or chaotically. There was a mathematical precision to their movements, a choreography that suggested intelligence and purpose. When one moved to the left, the others adjusted to maintain formation. When one accelerated, the others followed perfectly. Even more intriguing was the reaction of the surrounding environment. As the lights approached the earth, small miracles began to occur. Dry plants that had not been watered for months began to sprout tentatively. Wells that had been empty for weeks began to gurgle with fresh water. The normally dry and harsh desert air became more humid, more breathable. It was as if the very arrival of these mysterious beings was awakening dormant forces in nature, as if their presence were a catalyst for energies the Hopi never knew existed. At dawn, when the first rays of sunlight began to paint the sky orange and gold, the lights were still there. But now, with the brightness of the day, it was possible to see more details. They weren't just lights. They were objects, oval-shaped objects, with surfaces that seemed made of a material that reflected light impossibly, creating rainbows where there should be no colors. And then, when the sun was fully risen and the day had officially begun, the objects landed. Not with the loud bang you'd expect from something falling from the sky, but with a gentleness that defied logic. They simply touched down like leaves falling from a tree, raising no dust, making no noise, leaving no marks on the earth. From the first object that landed, an opening appeared. Not a door that swung open with visible hinges or mechanisms, but a section of wall that simply dissolved, as if made of morning mist touched by the sun. And from within this opening, a figure emerged. The first thing that caught my attention wasn't his appearance, but his presence. It was as if the air around him became denser, more meaningful. Every movement he made seemed charged with purpose. Every gesture a part of a language the Hopi didn't know but somehow understood. The figure was tall, taller than any Hopi, with long limbs and proportions that were familiar yet strangely different. It was covered in a garment that seemed alive, subtly changing color as the light touched it. It wasn't cloth as the Hopi knew it, but something that flowed like water and shone like metal. And then there was the face, or rather what covered the face. It was an oval-shaped mask or helmet made of the same impossible material as the clothing. Where the eyes should have been, there were two areas emanating a soft light, not blinding but penetrating. As if they could see not just through the Hopi's eyes, but through their souls. More figures emerged from the other objects, all similar in appearance, but each with slight differences in the colors of their clothing, the patterns decorating their helmets, the symbols they held in their hands. They were not identical like soldiers in formation, but unique like members of a family. What happened next defied every expectation the Hopi might have had about first contact with otherworldly beings. There were no threats, no displays of power or superiority. Instead, the leading figure simply approached the Hopi group and with a graceful gesture bowed respectfully. It was a greeting, universal, unequivocal, loaded with meaning that transcended any barrier of language or culture. The being was showing respect, recognizing the dignity of the Hopi people, establishing from the very beginning that this encounter would be based on equality, not domination. Ahote, the elder who had first seen the light, stepped forward. His knees trembled not from fear, but from an emotion he couldn't name. It was like being in the presence of something sacred, something that had emerged from dreams and materialized into reality. With the wisdom of his 72 years, he intuitively understood that this moment called for courage, not caution. He returned the bow, bowing in the traditional Hopi manner, palms pressed together across his chest. And then, trusting instincts he didn't even know he possessed, he began to speak. Not in English, which he barely knew, but in the ancestral language of his people, words that carried the weight of thousands of years of history. "Spirits of the sky," he said, his voice trembling with emotion, "you are welcome to our land. We are a simple people, living in harmony with what the earth offers us. If you come in peace, you will find peace with us." What happened next would remain etched in the Hopi collective memory forever. The main being raised one hand, and a soft light began to emanate from its fingers, forming symbols in the air. They weren't written words, but images that floated like holograms, telling a story without sound. The first images showed the cosmos, stars, planets, galaxies spinning in an eternal dance. Next came images of Earth, seen from high above, a blue-green dot suspended in the vastness. Then the perspective zoomed in, revealing continents, oceans, and finally, the desert itself. But the images didn't stop there. They showed Earth at different times, like a visual time machine. The Hopi saw dinosaurs, ice ages, erupting volcanoes, oceans drying and forming again. They saw life emerging, evolving, adapting, and they saw civilizations, many civilizations. Some they recognized, others that seemed impossible, too advanced to have ever existed. The message was clear without words. We know your story, we know your Earth, and you are not alone. The images continued, now showing not the past, but possibilities. Green fields where once there was only sand, rivers flowing where once there was thirst, people living in abundance, in harmony, in peace. It wasn't a promise of an easy paradise, but a vision of what could be achieved with knowledge, wisdom, and cooperation. When the images finally dissolved into thin air, the silence that followed was not one of fear or confusion, but of understanding. The Hopi understood that these beings had not come to conquer or destroy. They had come to teach. One of the beings approached the children, who had watched with wide-eyed fascination. There was nothing threatening in his movements, just a gentleness that the children recognized instinctively. From a pouch attached to his clothing, he withdrew small objects that looked like seeds but glowed with a soft inner light. He offered a seed to each child, making gestures that clearly indicated they should be planted in the ground. The children, without hesitation, accepted the gifts. For them, this was not an alien encounter, but a visit from special friends who had come from far away to bring them gifts. In the days following first contact, the beings the Hopi began to call Kachinas established a routine that would become the foundation of a new era for the desert people. Each morning, as the sun rose, painting the stone mesas with hues of gold and red, they emerged from their ships and headed for the cornfields. But what they did in the fields challenged everything the Hopi believed they knew about agriculture. The Kachinas didn't bring complex machines or impossible tools. Instead, they began teaching by example, using their own hands to work the land in ways the Hopi had never imagined. The first lesson was about water. Water had always been the most precious resource in the desert, every drop contested between human needs and plant survival. The Hopi had developed a rudimentary irrigation system over generations, channeling the little rainfall that fell, and harnessing every natural spring. The Kachinas observed these systems for a few days, not with judgment, but with the patience of teachers who must first understand what their students already know before introducing new concepts. And then they began to reveal possibilities the Hopi had not considered. They taught about air humidity. Even in the driest desert, they explained through gestures and practical demonstrations, there is water suspended in the atmosphere. They showed how to build simple structures that condense this moisture during cold nights, collecting precious droplets that accumulated in small reservoirs. But most impressive was what they did with the seeds they had given the children. When planted following the Kachinas' gestural instructions, they sprouted in a way that seemed magical. Not only did they grow faster than any plant known to the Hopi, but they seemed to thrive with less water, poorer soil, and conditions that would normally kill any vegetation. The plants that grew from these seeds were impossible hybrids. They had the hardiness of cactus, the productivity of corn, and flavors that ranged from the sweetness of fruit to the nourishingness of meat. It was as if the Kachinas had taken the best of each plant species and combined them into creations that precisely met the needs of the desert people. But the teachings weren't limited to agriculture. The Kachinas observed how the Hopi lived, worked, and interacted, and began suggesting subtle improvements that completely transformed the tribe's quality of life. They demonstrated how to build homes that maintained stable temperatures not only through thick walls, but through a design that took advantage of natural air currents. They taught about positioning, where to build to catch the cooling evening breeze and avoid the most intense midday sun. They demonstrated how to use certain types of stone that absorbed heat during the day and slowly released it at night, creating a natural heating and cooling system. In medicine, the Kachinas revealed properties of local plants that the Hopi had never discovered, not through lengthy explanations that the Hopi could not understand, but through practical demonstrations. They gathered certain herbs at dawn while the dew was still present, and demonstrated how to prepare them in ways that concentrated their healing properties. There was a thorny plant that grew abundantly in the desert, and which the Hopi had always avoided because of its menacing appearance. The Kachinas demonstrated that when harvested at the new moon and prepared in a specific way, it became a powerful remedy for the joint pains that afflicted many of the elders. Another revolutionary discovery involved a type of fungus that grew on the roots of certain trees. The Hopi had always ignored it because it seemed poisonous. The Kachinas demonstrated that when dried in the sun for exactly 3 days and then mixed with wild honey, it became a natural antibiotic capable of curing infections that previously meant certain death. But perhaps the most transformative teaching was about astronomy. The Hopi had always used the stars for navigation and to mark the seasons, but the Kachinas revealed that the sky contained much more detailed information about the cycles of nature. They taught that certain constellations, when positioned in certain ways, indicated not only when to plant, but what kind of plants would thrive. They showed that the moon's position relative to certain stars could accurately predict when the rains would come, allowing the Hopi to prepare weeks in advance. Even more fascinating, the Kachinas demonstrated that certain star patterns could predict earthquakes, storms, and other natural phenomena. They taught Hopi shamans how to read these signs, transforming them into a kind of early warning system that would save many lives in the years to come. During the evenings, when the physical work was finished, the Kachinas would gather with the people around their fires. It was at these times that the teachings became deeper, more philosophical. Through their visual displays of light, they shared concepts about the interconnectedness of all things. They showed that every action, no matter how small, created ripples of consequence that spread far beyond what humans could perceive. Caring for a single plant influenced the entire ecosystem. Kindness shown to one person multiplied through their interactions with others. Wisdom shared with a child would spread through future generations. It was a philosophy of cosmic responsibility that resonated deeply with traditional Hopi beliefs, but expanded to scales they had never imagined. As the months passed, the Kachinas' presence transformed not only the Hopis' agricultural and medicinal practices, but the very fabric of their society. The changes were subtle at first, almost imperceptible, like seeds germinating quietly beneath the earth before bursting forth into a burst of life. The first transformation was in the way decisions were made. Traditionally, the Hopi consulted only elders and shamans on important tribal matters. The Kachinas, through their gestural and visual demonstrations, suggested a different model, a wisdom circle that included people of all ages. They demonstrated through their light projections how different perspectives created more complete solutions. One image depicted a problem represented as a mountain seen from multiple angles. Each angle revealed aspects of the mountain that were invisible from other vantage points. Only by combining all the perspectives was it possible to truly understand the mountain's complete form. The metaphor was clear. Important decisions required the experience of elders, the energy of youth, the intuition of women, the strength of men, and especially the unguarded honesty of children. The Kachinas demonstrated that children, free from the prejudices and mental limitations of adults, often perceived solutions that eluded even the wisest. This new decision-making model was first tested when a dispute arose over the use of water from a newly discovered spring. Traditionally, elders would gather, debate, and make a decision that everyone would accept. But following the Kachinas' teaching, they formed a circle that included everyone from the oldest member of the tribe to children who could barely speak. The result was surprising. The elders proposed practical divisions based on need. The young adults suggested shift systems based on efficiency. The women brought up considerations about the medicinal use of water. And a 7-year-old child, with the simplicity that only innocence allows, asked, "Why don't we ask the water to tell us how it wants to be used?" The question seemed absurd at first, but the Kachinas responded with what the Hopi interpreted as approval. They led the entire tribe to the spring, and through their visual demonstrations, demonstrated the water's flow patterns, how it interacted with the rocks, the plants, and the animals that came to drink. The water, they revealed, had its own rhythm, its own wisdom. Following these natural patterns, the Hopi developed a system of use that not only met human needs, but also improved the ecosystem surrounding the spring. It was a revolutionary concept, working with nature rather than against it, listening to its needs rather than simply imposing human desires. The second major transformation was in children's education. The Kachinas observed how knowledge was traditionally passed down from generation to generation through stories told around campfires. It was an effective system, but limited by the storyteller's memorization capacity and subjectivity. They introduced a complementary method, learning through direct experience combined with visual recordings. They taught the Hopi to create symbols that captured not just information, but complete experiences. These were not just drawings, but a form of three-dimensional writing that included tactile, olfactory, and even emotional elements. A single mark could contain information about a medicinal plant, how to recognize it, when to harvest it, how to prepare it, what sensations it should produce, what precautions to take, and even what emotions or memories its preparation should evoke. It was a way of reserving knowledge that went far beyond simple instructions, capturing complete experiential wisdom. The children, with their flexible minds and active imaginations, absorbed this new system with astonishing ease. Soon they were creating their own visual records, documenting discoveries they made during their play and explorations. An 8-year-old girl named Ayana created a complex symbol describing a technique for soothing injured animals that she had developed by observing her grandmother care for an injured coyote. The symbol not only demonstrated the necessary gestures, but also captured the specific emotional energy that needed to be conveyed, a combination of firmness and compassion that could not be expressed in words. The third transformation was in art and cultural expression. The Kachinas brought with them not only practical knowledge, but also an aesthetic that completely expanded the Hopi vision of beauty and creativity. Their very garments were living works of art, changing color and pattern according to their emotions and intentions. They taught Hopi artisans pigmentation techniques using local minerals that produce colors never before seen. These weren't just more vibrant colors, but colors that seemed to have a life of their own, subtly changing as the daylight shifted. A ceramic pot painted with these techniques could be deep blue at dawn, emerald green at noon, and royal purple at dusk. Even more revolutionary was what they taught about music and dance. The Hopi had always used music in their rituals, but the Kachinas revealed that sound and movement could be far more powerful tools of healing and transformation than they had imagined. They demonstrated that certain sound frequencies could accelerate plant growth, heal wounds, and even purify contaminated water. They taught dances that were not just artistic expressions, but bodily technologies that aligned humans with the Earth's natural rhythms. One such dance, which the Hopi called the true rain dance, involved specific movements performed in precise geometric formations. That, the Kachinas demonstrated, created energy patterns that literally influenced local weather systems. It wasn't superstition or symbolic ritual. It was a science the Hopi had no words to explain, but could feel at work. During these months of intensive learning, something deeper was happening to the Hopi people. It wasn't just their techniques and knowledge that were changing, but their fundamental perception of their place in the universe. The Kachinas' teachings revealed that they were not a small tribe lost in the desert, but part of a cosmic network of connected consciousnesses. The Kachinas demonstrated, through their nocturnal visual projections, that intelligent life existed on countless worlds scattered throughout the galaxy. Each civilization had its own unique characteristics, but all were connected by invisible threads of energy and purpose. Earth was not an isolated planet, but an important node in this cosmic web. This revelation brought the Hopi a simultaneous sense of humility and grandeur. Humility in realizing how small they were on the cosmic scale. Grandeur in understanding that their actions, however small, reverberated through this network, influencing the development of other civilizations. It was an overwhelming and exciting responsibility at the same time. As trust between the Hopi and the Kachina deepened, the teachings became more complex and revealing. Visitors began sharing knowledge that challenged not only traditional practices, but also the Hopi's very understanding of reality. It was during a particularly clear night, when the stars shone with unusual intensity, that the Kachinas made their most stunning revelation. They gathered the entire tribe in a wide circle around their ships, and for the first time since their arrival, allowed the Hopi to see inside their vessels. What turned out to be defied all expectations. From the outside, the ships appeared the size of large tents, but inside, the space seemed infinitely larger. It was like looking into a cave that stretched beyond the eye's reach, illuminated by a soft light that came from no visible source. The interior walls pulsed gently with patterns of light that moved like water, creating ever-changing symbols and images. It wasn't decoration, the Hopi realized, but information. The walls were living communication surfaces, displaying data on weather conditions, stellar cycles, and what appeared to be energy mappings of the entire region. Even more impressive was what the Kachinas gestured to as the Garden of Possibilities. One section of the ship contained plants that did not exist on Earth, or at least not yet. They were evolved versions of Earth species, developed over millennia of conscious selection and genetic enhancement. There were trees that produced fruits with specific medicinal properties for different human organs. A red fruit that strengthened the heart, a blue one that improved vision, a golden one that increased mental capacity, flowers that released aromas capable of healing depression, anxiety, and deep emotional trauma. The Kachinas explained through their visual demonstrations that these plants represented Earth's future potential. They were not aliens, but earthlings, versions of what local species could become with the right care and wisdom. It was a vision of the planet as a cosmic garden, where each life form was consciously cultivated for its maximum beneficial potential. But the most profound revelation came when the Kachinas showed the Hopi what they called Earth memories. Using technology the Hopi could not understand but could experience, the visitors allowed some members of the tribe to see the complete history of the planet, not through books or stories, but through direct experience. For a few intense and transformative moments, the Hopi were able to feel what it was like to be a tree growing for decades, experience the perspective of a mountain forming over millions of years, perceive the world through the senses of animals extinct for ages. They saw civilizations that had flourished and disappeared long before the first humans walked the earth. Civilizations of beings who were not human, but were intelligent, conscious, and deeply connected to the planet. Some had departed for the stars. Others had evolved into forms of existence that transcended physical matter. And some had simply chosen to dissolve back into the planetary consciousness. Earth, the Hopi discovered, was not just a planet with life. It was a conscious being, an entity with its own mind, memories, and purposes. Each species living on it was like a cell in its cosmic body, each ecosystem an organ with specific functions in maintaining its overall health. Humans, the Kachinas revealed, had a special role in this planetary organism. They were Earth's nerve cells, capable of perceiving and processing information in ways other species could not. But with this privilege came a tremendous responsibility. They were responsible for helping Earth maintain its health and continue its cosmic evolution. This revelation completely transformed the Hopi's perception of their relationship with nature. They were not merely inhabitants of the Earth, they were conscious participants in its ongoing evolution. Every decision they made, every action they took, directly influenced the well-being of an incomprehensibly vast and ancient sentient being. During the weeks following these revelations, the Kachinas began teaching more advanced techniques of communicating with planetary consciousness. They showed the Hopi Hamans, to attune their minds to the subtle rhythms of the Earth, how to perceive its needs and desires, and how to consciously collaborate in its evolutionary process. These techniques were not symbolic rituals, but practical methods of receiving information directly from the planet's oldest and wisest source. Shamans learned to listen to the Earth as they listened to each other, sensing its communications through changes in wind currents, plant growth patterns, and animal behavior. One of the shamans, a man named Esno, meaning lone wanderer, developed a particular ability for these communications. He discovered he could literally feel the Earth's emotions, its joy when the rains came, its sadness when areas were devastated, its excitement when new life forms emerged. Through Esno, the Earth began communicating her specific needs to the tribe. She requested that certain areas be left untouched for regeneration, that certain plants be grown in specific locations to balance local energies, and that particular rituals be performed at precise astronomical times to help her align with larger cosmic cycles. The Hopi discovered that following these guidelines not only benefited the environment, but also dramatically improved their own lives. Harvests became more abundant, diseases became rarer, and internal conflicts virtually disappeared. It was as if, by consciously caring for the Earth reciprocated by consciously caring for them. After nearly 2 years of living and teaching among the Hopi, subtle signs began to indicate that the Kachinas were preparing to leave. These weren't obvious signs. They didn't announce their departure or begin to say formal goodbyes. But those who had learned to observe with the sensitivity the visitors had taught them began to notice almost imperceptible changes. Their ships, which had remained open and accessible all this time, began to glow with a different intensity at night. The light was no longer constant, but pulsed in complex patterns that seemed like communications directed into space, as if they were sending reports or receiving instructions from far away. The Kachinas themselves became more contemplative, spending long hours in silent meditation atop stone mesas, their luminous eyes fixed on the stars. When they interacted with the Hopi, there was a different quality to their presence, no less caring, but tinged with a melancholy that even children could sense. It was Ayana, the girl who had created the symbol to calm animals, who first asked directly. With the brutal honesty only children possess, she approached the Kachina who had become her favorite teacher and gestured, "Are you leaving?" The answer came not in words, but in images projected into the air. The Kachina displayed a visual sequence that began with a seed being planted, growing into a strong tree, and then producing its own seeds that spread on the wind to germinate in distant places. The message was clear. The time for planting was over. Now it was time for the seeds of knowledge that had been planted to grow and spread on their own. The news spread through the tribe with the speed of a desert fire. There was no panic or despair, but deep sadness mixed with gratitude. The Hopi knew this moment would come eventually. The Kachinas had never promised to stay forever, but knowing and feeling are very different things. In the final weeks before departure, the Kachinas intensified their teachings, like teachers attempting to impart years of knowledge in a few remaining lessons. But the focus shifted from practical aspects to something deeper and more lasting, the preservation and transmission of all that had been learned. They worked extensively with Hopi artisans to create masks and costumes that captured not only their appearance, but also their energetic essence. These were not simple visual reproductions, but objects imbued with specific frequencies that, when used during appropriate rituals, would allow the Hopi to connect with the consciousness of the Kachinas even after their departure. Each mask was a work of technological art, incorporating specific minerals and materials that the Kachinas had taught them to locate and prepare. When a Hopi shaman wore one of these masks during a ceremony, he wasn't just representing a Kachina, he was literally channeling aspects of his consciousness and knowledge. The Kachina also worked with the tribe's storytellers to codify their teachings into narratives that could be passed down orally through the generations. But these were no ordinary stories. They were constructed using specific mnemonic techniques that ensured that complex technical information was accurately preserved through hundreds of years of oral transmission. Each story contained multiple layers of meaning. For a child, it was a thrilling adventure about magical beings. For a teenager, it was a lesson in responsibility and growth. For an adult, it was a manual of agricultural and medicinal techniques. For a shaman, it was a detailed map of spiritual knowledge and cosmic consciousness. Most importantly, the Kachinas established a precise ritual calendar that would allow the Hopi to maintain a continuous connection with them and the knowledge they had shared. These were not just arbitrary dates, but astronomically specific moments when energetic conditions would be ideal for different types of practices. During the winter solstice, the Hopi would perform ceremonies that would reconnect them with Earth's planetary consciousness. At the spring equinox, rituals would facilitate communication with other star-based civilizations. During lunar eclipses, practices would allow them to access the Earth memories that the Kachinas had shown them. Each of these ceremonies was carefully choreographed, with specific dances, chants at particular frequencies, and the use of masks and ritual objects prepared under precise conditions. It wasn't superstition, but spiritual technology, tested and refined methods for achieving specific states of consciousness and cosmic connection. The Kachinas also created what they called continuity tests, periodic challenges that would arise naturally to test whether the Hopi were truly upholding the teachings or simply going through the motions. These tests wouldn't be obvious, but would manifest as real-life situations that required the practical application of Kachina wisdom. If the Hopi passed these tests, if they could apply the teachings to solve real problems, heal conflicts, and maintain harmony with the earth, then they would know they were truly honoring the legacy of their teachers. If they failed, it would be a sign that they needed to return to fundamental practices and rediscover the essence of the teachings. The night of their departure arrived during a rare planetary conjunction, when 5 planets aligned in the night sky in a way that hadn't happened in centuries and wouldn't happen again for many generations. It was no coincidence. The Kachinas had planned their departure to coincide with this particular cosmic event. The entire tribe gathered at the same spot where first contact had occurred almost 2 years earlier. But how everything had changed since then. The Hopi were no longer the same people. They walked with a new confidence, spoke with a wisdom they hadn't possessed before, and looked to the sky with an understanding that they were part of something infinitely greater. The changes weren't just internal. The very land surrounding the village had transformed. Where once there had been only sand and rocks, gardens now flourished with plants that combined terrestrial species with the genetic gifts of the Kachina. The water flowed more abundantly, the air smelled purer, and there was a palpable energy of life and growth that hadn't existed before. The Kachinas emerged from their ships one last time, but this time there was something final in their movements. They moved through the Hopi crowd like teachers making a final inspection of their students, gently touching the children's heads, bowing respectfully before the elders, offering gestures of appreciation to the artisans who had worked so diligently to learn their techniques. When they reached Ahoti, the elder who had first spotted their lights in the sky, the chief Kachina paused for a long moment. Through his projections of light, he shared a final vision, not of the past or the future, but of the eternal present. An image of the Hopi people as part of a vast network of consciousnesses stretching across the galaxy, all connected, all learning from each other, all growing together. It was a vision of unity that transcended species, planets, and even time itself. The Hopi people, the Kachina, seemed to communicate, were not only recipients of wisdom, but also teachers who would eventually share what they had learned with others in need. The ceremony that followed was unlike anything the Hopi had experienced before. It was part celebration, part mourning ritual, and part technological procedure. The Kachinas used their ships to project holographic images into the sky that told the complete story of their time together, from the first sighting of the lights to this moment of farewell. But these images weren't just memories. They were being permanently recorded in the Earth's own electromagnetic field, creating a permanent record that future generations of psychics could access through appropriate rituals. The Kachinas were literally encoding their teachings into the planet's memory banks. As the ceremony progressed, something unexpected happened. The Hopi began to experience what could only be described as expanded consciousness. Their awareness suddenly encompassed not only their own thoughts and feelings, but also those of other tribe members. For a few precious minutes, they experienced true telepathic unity. Through this connection, they could sense the deep love and respect the Kachinas had for them. More importantly, they could sense a promise that went beyond words. The Kachinas were physically departing, but their consciousness would remain accessible to those who knew how to reach it. They had taught the Hopi not only techniques for agriculture and healing, but methods for maintaining contact across vast distances of space and time. The masks, the ceremonies, the ritual calendar, all these were communication devices, ways of reaching across the cosmos to touch the minds and hearts of their teachers whenever guidance was needed. When it was time for the Kachinas to board their ships, there were no tearful goodbyes or dramatic speeches. Instead, Each visitor approached each member of the tribe for a final moment of personal connection. To the children, they offered small gifts, crystals that would glow softly whenever the children were in danger, providing protection and guidance. To the adults, they shared brief visual messages containing specific advice for challenges they would face. To the elders, they imparted profound knowledge about the cosmic purpose of human consciousness and Earth's role in galactic evolution. The most profound moment came when the tribe's youngest child, a baby born during the Kachinas' stay, was presented to the visitors. This child, they indicated through their gestures, carried within her genetic code some of the enhancements they had subtly introduced to help humanity evolve. She would grow up to possess abilities that would have seemed magical to previous generations: enhanced intuition, natural healing abilities, and an innate understanding of ecological balance. She was, in a sense, a bridge between ancient humanity and the improved version the Kachinas envisioned. Through her and others like her, the improvements they had introduced would gradually spread throughout the human species, preparing them for their eventual role as conscious participants in cosmic evolution. When the Kachinas finally boarded their ships, the atmosphere was filled with a strange energy. The very air seemed to vibrate with possibility, and many of the Hopi reported feeling as if they were witnessing not just a departure, but a graduation ceremony. They were graduating from students to teachers, from vessels of wisdom to keepers of sacred knowledge. The ships ascended slowly, maintaining their triangular formation as when they first arrived. But this time, instead of lights descending, they were stars ascending, carrying with them the love, gratitude, and commitment of the Hopi people. As they reached the upper atmosphere, the ships paused. A final message was projected down to the assembled tribe, not in images this time, but directly into their consciousness. It was simple, clear, and eternal. We are never truly leaving. We are always available to those who remember how to listen. Use what we teach you wisely, share it generously, and never forget that you are not alone in this vast cosmos. Then they were gone, disappearing into the star field as if they had never been there. But they had been there. The changes in the land, the people, and the Hopi consciousness itself were proof that something extraordinary had occurred. And in the years that followed, as the teachings were tested, refined, and passed down through the generations, it became clear that the Kachinas had left behind much more than just agricultural techniques or healing methods. They had left behind a roadmap for human evolution, a blueprint for living in harmony with cosmic consciousness, and a promise that whenever humanity truly needed guidance, it would be available to those who remembered how to ask for it. This story of the Kachinas makes me think of our own journey of transformation. Just as the Hopi had to learn new ways of living to thrive in the desert, we often find ourselves stuck in patterns that no longer serve us, repeating cycles that keep us stagnant. That's why I want to invite you to read the book. The Forgotten Agreement, the 30-Day Challenge. Just as the Kachinas brought transformative practices to the Hopi, this book presents a proven method for breaking repetitive cycles and creating real change in your life. It's 30 days of progressive practices that help you identify the unconscious patterns that limit you and develop new habits that take you where you truly want to be. If you feel like you're always living the same life, facing the same problems, experiencing the same frustrations, this book could be your first introduction to a new way of living. Link in first pinned comment. The Kachinas' farewell reveals a painful truth about all genuine growth. There will come a time when you must walk alone with what you've learned. The Hopi experienced this profound pain, the pain of being left behind by those who loved and transformed them most. This is a pain we all know. It's the pain of growing up and realizing your parents can no longer solve your problems. It's the pain of outgrowing a mentor and discovering you now need to rely on your own wisdom. It's the pain of growing up and realizing that no one can live your life for you. But the Kachinas teach us that this separation is not abandonment, it's graduation. They didn't leave because they no longer cared about the Hopi. They left because they knew that true love sometimes requires giving the people you love the opportunity to discover their own strength. The pain of separation is proportional to the depth of the transformation. If it doesn't hurt when your teachers leave, perhaps you haven't truly learned. If you don't feel fear when you have to apply what you've been taught on your own, perhaps you haven't grasped the responsibility that comes with knowledge. The Hopi discovered that they carried within themselves everything they needed to continue thriving. But they only discovered this when they were forced to rely on their own newfound wisdom. The same thing happens to us. Sometimes the people who have helped us the most need to step away so we can discover that we are stronger and more capable than we imagined. The Kachinas promise that they would always be available to those who knew how to seek it reminds us that true knowledge never completely abandons us. It integrates with who we are, becomes part of our consciousness, and is always accessible when we truly need it. The question remains, what would you do if your greatest teachers and supporters disappeared tomorrow? Would you find that you've internalized their lessons and can continue to grow? Or would you realize that you've been relying too heavily on them and haven't developed your own inner wisdom? The legend of the Kachinas challenges us to become the masters of our own journey, always maintaining the humility, knowing that we are part of something much greater than ourselves. If this story touched you in any way, if these reflections resonated with you, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. This way, you'll continue receiving stories and teachings that can illuminate your own path of growth and transformation. And tell me in the comments, what part of this legend resonated with you the most? What teachings from the Kachinas would you like to apply in your life? Your interaction helps me understand what kind of content resonates most with you and inspires me to continue bringing these transformative narratives. Thank you for staying with me this far on this journey through the mysteries of the Kachinas. Until the next story.